If you've ever tried writing a book, you'll understand just how daunting a task it can be, especially if it's your first time. For this video, I'm going to be sharing my own experience and struggles with getting down to that last word, but also I'm going to share some tricks I used to help keep me writing even when I felt stuck. And hopefully, by the end of this, you'll get the motivation to start writing your own, or pick up where you left off. So let's jump right into it. Before I even started writing, I wanted to have an idea of just how long my book should be. So I looked up the typical length of a light novel, and I learned that they're usually around 50,000 words. Once I had that number, I needed to figure out how much time I should give myself to complete the first draft. I determined that if I wrote 5,000 words a week, I could reach the minimum count in 10 weeks. But since this was my first attempt, I wanted to give myself a reasonable amount of time. In the end, I made it my goal to have at least 50,000 words written within 12 weeks if the first draft wasn't already completed by then. Once my goal and deadline were established, I got to writing. Tuesday through Friday, I would write 1,000 words, and Saturday through Monday would get broken up so I wouldn't get overwhelmed. I kept this routine pretty much until the day I finished. I'd sit down to start writing, and inevitably, I would have the thought, oh, I don't know if I can do 1,000 today. To which I would immediately reply, do it anyway. I never made my daily objective all in one sitting. I'd have to break it up throughout the day. But I used two crucial maneuvers to make sure I always reached my quota. One, I'd give myself time to let my creativity run on autopilot. I'd focus on my job, I'd go for a walk, I'd listen to music, I'd take a bath. And while I was doing any of these things, my mind would be weaving all these details of the book without having any of the pressure of delivering it on the page. Once I had enough new material, I'd go back to my desk and start writing again. The second maneuver was doing a genre pivot. When coming up with my premise, I knew that it would be challenging to write a novel. I recognized that I could get burned out very quickly. So I decided to make it a story consisting of multiple genres: science fiction, detective, and fantasy. Whenever I got stuck in my writing, I would put the unfinished scene aside and write another section of the novel that was in a different genre. So for example, if I wasn't in the right headspace to write a detective scene, I would jump ahead and explore some world building with the technology, or write a scene that delved into the more fantastical aspects of certain characters. This allowed me to keep my creative momentum and minimize my writer's block. Early on, I started to notice that I would often exceed my 1,000 word quota. To mitigate some of my anxiety for the next day, I would often write an extra 200 or 300 words. That way I wouldn't need to write a full 1,000 if I got stuck. But thankfully, that never actually happened because I consistently wrote more than my daily objective. In a little under 8 weeks, I reached my goal of 50,000 words. However, my story still wasn't finished. But having reached that milestone, I was able to ride that wave of confidence and see my first draft through to the end. And speaking of confidence, I had the struggle of that horrible inner critic, the bane of any creative person's existence. If you want to look at it in philosophical terms, writing is frequently a battle of faith versus doubt. The usual negative thoughts would come floating into my mind.
You've never written a novel before. What makes you think you can do it now? This is a waste of time.
No one is ever gonna read this. Your novel is garbage.
The reality is that the inner critic is never going to leave you completely. But you can use it to push yourself toward your goal. For me, I relied on my studies of cognitive behavioral therapy and used reframing techniques. So when I had that thought,
You've never written a novel before.
I would tell myself, you're right, which is why I want to do it now. Most people will never finish a first draft. Most people won't even bother to make the attempt. So I've already accomplished more than the majority of the world, and that's something to be proud of. So I'm going to keep going until I finish.
This is a waste of time.
No, it's not. I'm thoroughly enjoying this. I'm developing my writing skills, I'm crafting a story that stimulates my imagination, and most importantly, I'm utilizing that part of myself that makes me unique among all other animals. The act of creation, the search for goodness, beauty, and truth. That's far from a waste of time.
Your novel is garbage.
My novel isn't finished. I'm only shaping the clay at this stage. It's not even close to being a full sculpture. So there's little point in trying to compare my work with a professional author's finished novel. And as I work on it, little by little, it'll get better.
No one is ever gonna read this.
the people who matter to me will read it. I'm not in this to create a bestseller. My work is intended to appeal to readers with tastes like mine. And if there are only 10 people who ever read my book and come away enjoying it, then I count that as a tremendous success. So those are a few examples of how I use CBT to fight against the inner critic. But the real clincher was a moment I'll never forget. My wife and I went to a Chinese restaurant one afternoon, and at the end of our meal, I received a fortune cookie. And I got the best message I could possibly receive. The fortune said, "Your imagination brings great joy to those around you." It was a godsend if there ever was one. I've held on to this little fortune, and I have a picture of it as my computer's wallpaper, so I never lose sight of why I write. But even with the strict routine and techniques to help me mentally, I found myself still writing to the very last minute on the day of my deadline. I felt adrenaline pumping through me as I grew closer and closer to the end. And when I typed those last words, saved that file, and closed my laptop, I felt incredible. I'd done it. I wrote the first draft of my novel, and I did it in 3 months. That's more than I could have hoped for. Now, I knew it wasn't perfect, but it was exactly what it needed to be in that moment. With my objective accomplished, I put my first draft aside and took a much-needed vacation. Once I had time to relax and disconnect from my work, I opened it up, and I read it straight from beginning to end. My response to the work led to some strange inner conflict because when I read my first draft, I thought it was actually pretty good. Unpolished and definitely in need of revisions and rewrites, but still good. And I wasn't sure what to think of that. Everything I had read from other authors said that your first draft is going to be awful and you're going to hate it. So, was I doing something wrong? Had I deluded myself into thinking a turd was a treasure? I'm going to give you my honest answer. No. No, I don't believe I was doing something wrong, nor do I think I was deluded. I was simply appreciating the merits of my writing while recognizing that it was not yet ready to be published. And if you finished your first draft and you think your writing is good, don't punish yourself for feeling that way. Writing is hard work, and hard work deserves appreciation and praise. As I've referenced in another video, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. You don't have to disregard the best qualities of your writing. They are there. It's just that the next step is to raise everything else to a higher standard. For me, that meant focusing on improving my dialogue tags and action prose. And even now, moving on to my third draft, I'm finding myself exploring and improving on things that I find along the way. But I know I can make it the book I want it to be. So writing this first draft of my first book was quite an undertaking. It demanded a great deal of planning, discipline, mental fortitude, but in the end, it was an incredible experience. I felt so much satisfaction going through the agony of writing every day and weaving a story that I was invested in. And if you're on the fence about writing a book, I encourage you to give it a try. Figure out your word count, make a schedule and deadline that's reasonable but demanding, and see it through. You might surprise yourself by what you're capable of. And if you have any first draft experiences that you'd like to share, please post them here. I'd love to hear what challenges, lessons, or victories that you've had. Until next time, keep writing.